You have no jurisdiction over this land.
We decide what happens here, not you.
The first thing Patricia Holloway ever said to me was, "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." And 30 minutes later, there were two sheriff's deputies standing in my driveway, while half the neighborhood watched from their porches with coffee mugs in their hands. Cold lake wind rolled across the shoreline behind my cabin as I stepped outside that morning, the smell of wet cedar and rain-soaked gravel hanging in the air. Fog drifted low over the water beyond the fishing docks, thick enough to blur the pine trees across the lake into dark gray shadows. I'd only been in Bellmere Cove for 3 days, still unpacking boxes from my uncle's place, and already Patricia Holloway had decided I was a problem that needed to be made public. If you've ever dealt with one of those HOA people who smile while threatening your life sideways, comment below with your city. I swear every county in America has at least one Patricia. Her white Lexus sat crooked near my mailbox while she stood there in pressed beige slacks holding a clipboard against her chest like she worked for the federal government instead of a lakeside HOA with too much money and too much free time. "Mr. Walker," she said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "we sent 2 notices regarding your non-compliant trailer and unauthorized dock repairs." I looked past her toward the muddy shoreline where my uncle's old aluminum fishing boat rocked against the posts. "I just got here," I said calmly, "and I'm not in your HOA." That changed her face immediately. It wasn't rage at first. It was worse. It was that polished little smile wealthy control freaks use when they think they're about to embarrass somebody publicly. Rain tapped softly against the metal roof over my porch while she glanced toward the houses across the road, making sure people were watching. "Everyone here," she said slowly, "is under Bellmere Cove authority. Not this property." I kept my voice even. No attitude. No yelling. That seemed to irritate her more than if I'd argued. She stepped closer onto the gravel driveway, heels crunching against wet stone. "You may not understand how things work here yet," she said, lowering her voice just enough to sound fake polite. "But refusing HOA compliance creates legal exposure." There it was. The threat hidden inside suburban manners. Across the road, somebody lifted a phone toward us. Patricia noticed too. She straightened instantly, performance mode switching on. "I'm trying to help you avoid serious consequences." "By trespassing?" I asked. That landed harder than I expected. Her jaw tightened for half a second before the smile returned. "Deputies are already on the way," she said. "Given your hostility, I felt it was necessary." That caught me off guard. Not because I was scared, but because she'd planned this before I even walked outside. 2 black county SUVs turned onto the road almost on cue, tires hissing across wet pavement. One of the neighbors actually stepped onto his porch to watch better. You could feel the shift immediately. Public spectacle. Public humiliation. Patricia folded her arms as the deputies approached like she'd just won something. "Morning, ma'am," one deputy said. "This the property owner?" Patricia answered before I could. "He claims to be." That word hung there in the cold morning air while thunder rolled somewhere across the lake. And for the first time since inheriting my uncle's cabin, I had the uncomfortable feeling something about this neighborhood was very wrong. Deputy Ryan Cole stood beside my porch with rain collecting on the shoulders of his dark brown sheriff jacket, while Patricia Holloway stayed carefully positioned near the driveway, where everyone across the street could still see her. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Every move was designed for an audience. The second deputy stayed near the SUVs while Cole glanced between me and Patricia like he already regretted getting called out before 8 in the morning. Fog drifted low across the lake behind the cabin, and the wind pushed cold air through the cedar trees hard enough to make the old dock chains rattle against the posts down by the shoreline. Patricia folded her arms tighter. "He is refusing compliance," she said. And he became confrontational the second I explained the neighborhood rules. I looked directly at the deputy. I told her this property is not part of the association. Cole nodded slowly. "Do you have documentation for that?" Before I could answer, Patricia gave a quiet little laugh like she had already prepared for this part. "These cabins changed hands years ago," she said. "The previous owner understood the arrangement perfectly." Previous owner. Not my uncle's name. Just a disposable label. That bothered me more than I expected. My Uncle Warren had spent 40 years fishing this lake, rebuilding this cabin with his own hands after a storm ripped through the shoreline back in the late 90s. Suddenly hearing Patricia reduce him to some vague old owner lit something uncomfortable in my chest. I stepped inside long enough to grab the deed folder from the kitchen counter beside my coffee thermos. Rain tapped steadily against the metal roof overhead while the deputies waited under the porch awning. Across the road, two residents stood by a pickup truck pretending not to stare. Patricia kept smiling at them every few seconds like she was managing optics during a campaign event. I handed Cole the paperwork. He scanned it quietly. His expression shifted just slightly. Not enough to alarm Patricia, but enough for me to notice. "This parcel number doesn't match the association map I was given," he said. Patricia answered immediately. Too quickly. "Because the county records are outdated." Cole looked at her. Outdated by how much? For the first time, she hesitated. Tiny pause. Barely there. Then the polished confidence came right back. "Bellmere Cove absorbed these outer lots years ago." "Through annexation?" I asked calmly. Patricia ignored me completely. That told me more than her answer would have. The deputy handed the folder back slowly. "At this point, this appears civil, not criminal," he said. Patricia's smile tightened again. "So anyone can just refuse association authority now?" "Ma'am," Cole said carefully, "property disputes are not resolved roadside." You could feel the social pressure shift slightly after that. One of the neighbors lowered his phone. Patricia noticed immediately and stepped closer to Cole, lowering her voice just enough to sound reasonable. "Deputy, with respect, this man has already created tension in the community." Created tension. I had been there less than 72 hours. Thunder rolled somewhere over the water again, while rain darkened the gravel around our boots. Cole finally exhaled and looked at me. "I would advise you to contact the county assessor and verify the parcel status officially." "Already planned to," I said. Patricia's eyes narrowed at that. Something changed behind the confidence for the first time. Not panic yet, but irritation. The kind people get when control slips half an inch farther than expected. Then she said something that stayed with me the rest of the day. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "people who fight the association here usually regret it." She said it politely, calmly, like advice from a neighbor. But the residents watching from their porches suddenly avoided eye contact. And right there in the cold lake air, I realized Patricia Holloway had done this before. By noon, the rain had settled into that cold, steady kind that turns lake towns quiet, the kind that makes every pickup truck in a diner parking lot look abandoned, even when people are sitting inside watching you through the windows. I drove into Bellmere's little downtown area with my uncle's old deed folder riding on the passenger seat beside me, heater humming weakly against the damp air inside the truck. The courthouse annex sat 2 blocks behind the sheriff's station, near the marina, a gray concrete building with water stains running beneath the windows like it had been slowly sinking into the weather for 30 years. I remember standing there in the drizzle looking at the county flags snapping in the wind, and thinking about Patricia saying people regretted fighting the association. Not arguing with them. Fighting them. That word kept replaying in my head. Inside the assessor's office, everything smelled like burnt coffee, wet jackets, and old paper. A clerk named Marianne sat behind thick glass flipping through parcel records while thunder rolled low outside over the lake. "Walker," she said after typing for almost a minute. "Cabin on Cedar Point Road?" "That is right." Her expression changed slightly. Same look Deputy Cole had earlier. "Small. Careful. Your parcel classification is unusual." "Unusual how?" She hesitated. "The property line records do not fully match the current Bellmere Cove subdivision overlay." That sentence landed hard enough to wake me up emotionally. Up until then, part of me still wondered if this was just small-town HOA intimidation and I had inherited paperwork nobody updated properly. But now there were 2 people reacting to the same inconsistency. Marianne lowered her voice. "You may want to speak directly with county mapping." Before I could answer, the front office door opened behind me, and 2 Bellmere residents walked in carrying umbrellas. Both recognized me immediately. One nodded awkwardly. The other looked away completely. You could already feel the social contamination spreading through town. Patricia had moved fast. I heard one of them whisper my name before they disappeared toward the permit desk. Outside, fog drifted over the marina, and the fishing docks creaked in the wind, while I sat in the truck staring at the rain sliding down the windshield. My phone buzzed 3 times back to back. Unknown numbers. Then a message finally came through from somebody named Carol Dunning. "You should probably just cooperate." Patricia does not stop. No introduction. No explanation. Just that. 10 minutes later, another text arrived. This one included a blurry screenshot from the Bellmere Cove residence page online. Somebody had posted a picture of sheriff vehicles outside my cabin with the caption, "New owner already causing issues." More than 40 comments. Half the town speculating about me before I had even unpacked fully. One comment said, "Warren Walker would be ashamed." That one hit harder than I expected. I shut the phone off and just sat there listening to rain hit the roof of the truck. For the first time since arriving, anger started replacing confusion. Quiet anger. Controlled. Because my uncle had loved this place. He spent years rebuilding storm damage along that muddy shoreline with his own hands. And now people who barely knew me were using his name like a weapon. Then my phone rang again. Deputy Ryan Cole. "Mr. Walker," he said carefully. "Off the record, you might want to avoid the neighborhood meeting tonight." I looked out toward the water where fog was swallowing the far shoreline inch by inch. "Why?" Silence for a second. Then he said, "Because Patricia Holloway just told everyone you are trying to sue the community." The neighborhood meeting started at 6:30 inside Bellmere Cove's little waterfront clubhouse, and by the time I pulled into the parking lot, the place already looked like a courtroom before sentencing. Pickup trucks lined the gravel overflow area beside the marina, headlights cutting through fog, drifting off the lake, while rain ticked softly against metal roofs all around the property. People stood beneath umbrellas talking in low voices until they saw my truck, and then conversations stopped almost in unison. That silence told me more than any online rumor ever could. Patricia Holloway had spent the entire afternoon preparing the town for my arrival. Through the clubhouse windows, I could see her moving confidently between tables in a cream-colored blazer, touching shoulders, smiling tightly, controlling the room before the meeting even started. Some people crave authority. Patricia craved emotional obedience. The moment I walked inside, half the residents suddenly found something else to stare at. Wet jackets hung near the entrance beside a table stacked with HOA newsletters and violation forms. The smell of coffee and lake water lingered in the warm air, while thunder rolled somewhere out beyond the shoreline docks. Patricia spotted me immediately. "Mr. Walker," she said brightly enough for everyone to hear. "I am glad you decided to join us after all." Not welcome. Join us. Like I was appearing before a committee. I took a seat near the back wall and noticed Deputy Cole standing near the exit with a paper cup in his hand. Off-duty clothes this time, which meant he was not there for law enforcement. He was there because he expected this to become ugly socially. HOA President Daniel Mercer opened the meeting with forced professionalism, but Patricia took control within minutes. "As many of you already know," she said, clasping her hands together carefully, "we are currently dealing with a property owner refusing community compliance obligations." You could feel every eye shift toward me again. Somebody near the front whispered, "That is him." Patricia continued calmly. "We have invested millions into preserving Bellmere Cove property values over the years. One unresolved parcel dispute could threaten that stability." There it was. She had escalated the narrative from neighborhood disagreement to financial threat against the entire community. Smart. Manipulative. Effective. A few residents nodded immediately. Fear always spreads faster when money gets attached to it. I stayed quiet until Daniel finally asked if I wanted to respond. "I inherited my uncle's property 3 weeks ago," I said evenly. "I have not threatened anybody. I simply asked for proof this parcel belongs to the association." Patricia gave a disappointed little smile. "Grant, with respect, demanding legal proof in public only creates unnecessary hostility." The way she said my first name without permission irritated me more than I expected, like she was trying to shrink me emotionally in front of the room. Then an older man near the Marina Committee stood up abruptly. "Warren Walker helped rebuild this town after the flood," he said. "He was never a problem." Patricia turned toward him so smoothly, it almost looked rehearsed. "And nobody is questioning Warren's contributions, Frank. But ownership changes things legally. Ownership changes things." The room quieted again after that, but something subtle had shifted. Not toward me yet, but away from her certainty. I noticed 2 residents exchanging glances near the coffee station. Doubt had entered the room for the first time. Then Patricia reached into a folder and slid several photographs onto the front table. Pictures of sheriff vehicles outside my cabin. Pictures of my dock. Pictures taken from across my property line without permission. "The board has documented ongoing non-compliance conditions," she announced. My chest tightened when I realized how coordinated this had become in less than a day. Somebody had already been sent to photograph my land. Deputy Cole looked uncomfortable immediately. Even Daniel Mercer shifted in his chair. Patricia mistook that silence for victory. "If this dispute continues," she said carefully, "the association may need legal remedies to protect community assets." Then she glanced directly at me with that same polished smile from my driveway. But this time I noticed something underneath it for the first time. Not confidence. Pressure. The meeting broke apart slowly after that. Not with shouting, but with the kind of strained silence people use when they realize something underneath the surface is no longer stable. Residents gathered into little clusters near the coffee station while rain hammered harder against the clubhouse roof. And for the first time since arriving in Bellmere Cove, people were no longer looking at me like the only problem in the room. They were looking at Patricia too, watching her, measuring her reactions. She stayed composed on the outside, but I could see the changes now. Faster blinking, tighter jaw, constant scanning of the room to see who still supported her. That polished certainty from my driveway was beginning to crack under pressure. I stepped outside into the cold lake air before the meeting fully ended. Fog rolled low across the marina and the muddy shoreline below the clubhouse, while dock lights reflected weakly across black water. Deputy Cole followed me a minute later, holding his paper cup like he regretted bringing it into this conversation. "You handled that better than most people would," he said quietly. "I learned a long time ago that angry people stop listening." He gave a dry laugh at that. Then his expression shifted serious again. "Off the record, Patricia has influence around here. More than she should." "How?" He looked back toward the clubhouse windows before answering. "Property board. Marina permits. Local business committee. Half this town owes her favors." That explained the fear. Not just HOA authority. Social control. Economic pressure. Reputation management. Bellmere was the kind of lake town where one influential person could quietly shape how everybody else treated you. The realization settled heavy in my chest while rainwater dripped from the clubhouse gutters nearby. "My uncle ever have problems with her?" I asked. Cole hesitated too long before answering. "Not directly." Not directly meant yes. Before I could press further, the clubhouse door opened behind us, and Patricia stepped outside beneath the awning, still perfectly composed despite the storm rolling across the lake. "Grant," she called gently, like we were old family friends discussing something unfortunate. "Could we speak privately?" Cole immediately excused himself without another word. "Smart man." Patricia walked toward me slowly across the wet concrete. Up close, she smelled faintly like expensive perfume and rain. "You are making this harder than it needs to be," she said softly. "You inherited a complicated situation, and people are reacting emotionally." By photographing my property, her expression did not move at all. "Residents are concerned." "Residents? Or you?" That landed. Tiny pause again. Then the smile returned. "Bellmere survives because we protect standards here." "From what?" I asked. "Cabins." For a second, real irritation flashed through her face. "From instability." There it was. The real word. Not compliance. Not rules. Control over uncertainty. She stepped closer beneath the awning while thunder echoed across the shoreline behind us. "Your uncle understood compromise," she said quietly. "That is why things stayed peaceful for years." Something cold moved through me hearing that. Warren Walker had never been passive a day in his life, which meant one of two things was true. Either Patricia was lying now, or my uncle had spent years dealing with pressure he never talked about. I looked past her toward the parking lot where residents were leaving under umbrellas, some avoiding eye contact with me entirely now, while others glanced toward Patricia nervously before walking away. Bellmere suddenly felt less like a neighborhood and more like a system people had learned not to challenge. Then Patricia reached into her folder and handed me a sealed envelope. "Formal notice from Association Council," she said calmly. "I strongly suggest you read it tonight." I waited until she walked back inside before opening it in my truck with rain rattling against the roof overhead. The letter accused me of interfering with protected association property access near the marina shoreline. But halfway down the page, one sentence stopped me cold. The legal description they referenced included parcel numbers that did not fully match the subdivision maps from the county office earlier that day. Different numbers, different boundary references. And suddenly, sitting there alone in the dark with fog swallowing the docks outside my windshield, I realized Patricia Holloway might not actually know where her own HOA legally ended. I barely slept that night. Rain pounded the cabin roof until almost dawn while fog rolled across the lake thick enough to erase the shoreline completely. And somewhere around 4 in the morning, I finally stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking like my uncle would have. Warren Walker never panicked under pressure. He documented things. He kept records. I remembered him once telling me, "The person who keeps the paper usually keeps the land." By sunrise, I had every box from the cabin attic spread across the living room floor beside cold coffee and old survey maps that smelled like mildew and wet cedar. Most of it looked ordinary at first. Boat permits, fuel receipts, flood repair invoices from the late 1990s. But then I found 3 things that changed the direction of the entire situation. First was an old marina access sketch with handwritten boundary notes in my uncle's writing. Second was an insurance letter referencing liability exposure connected to Bellmere Cove's entrance landscaping. Third was a faded photograph showing construction equipment placing the stone HOA entrance sign nearly 20 feet farther west than the subdivision line marked on the attached survey copy. I sat there staring at the photograph while cold lake wind rattled the windows. 20 feet did not sound like much to most people. But in property law, 20 feet in the wrong direction could become millions in liability if enough years passed. Around 8 that morning, I drove back toward the county offices with the documents sealed carefully inside a waterproof folder. Bellmere felt different now. Less emotional. More strategic. Residents still watched me from porches and pickup trucks, but the fear in my chest had started turning into focus. Patricia had spent days trying to control the public narrative. Fine. Then I would change the legal narrative underneath it. At the county mapping office, a senior survey technician named Ben Harlow studied the old photograph for almost a full minute without speaking. Rain streaked down the office windows behind him while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. "Where exactly did you get this?" he asked quietly. "My uncle's records." He zoomed into the survey markers visible in the corner of the image. Then his expression changed completely. That entrance wall should not be there. Hearing someone finally say it out loud sent a strange calm through me. Not victory. Confirmation. Ben pulled archive plat overlays onto his screen while thunder echoed somewhere over the courthouse square outside. "If these coordinates are accurate," he said slowly, "the association entrance landscaping, sign structure, and possibly part of the marina access road may sit outside the recorded HOA parcel." I leaned back silently while the weight of that settled into the room. Bellmere Cove's entire image centered around that entrance. The stone wall, the lighting, the gated marina road. Patricia had weaponized that symbol against people for years. And now there was a real possibility the HOA did not fully own it. Ben rubbed his forehead. This could create title insurance problems. For who? I asked. He looked directly at me. Potentially everybody. That was the moment the scale changed emotionally. This was no longer about one angry HOA president harassing a new resident. This was exposure. Institutional exposure. Liability exposure. Public embarrassment. And Patricia Holloway still did not know. As I walked back through the courthouse lobby, several residents near the permit counter recognized me immediately. One woman turned away awkwardly. Another stared openly now instead of pretending not to. The rumors were evolving. You could feel it. Bellmere no longer saw me as just the outsider causing trouble. Some of them were starting to wonder whether Patricia had pushed too hard against the wrong property. 2 days later, the atmosphere around Bellmere Cove had changed completely. Not openly. Small towns never shift openly at first. The pressure changes quietly, like weather rolling over a lake before a storm hits shore. People stopped waving at Patricia in public the same way they used to. Conversations cut off when she walked into the diner near the marina. Residents who once echoed everything she said now lowered their voices and checked who was listening first. Rumors move fast in lake communities, but liability rumors move even faster, especially among homeowners with $600,000 mortgages tied to property values. I noticed it the morning I walked into Halper's Diner for coffee, and 3 men near the counter abruptly stopped talking when I entered. One of them finally muttered, "That survey thing true?" before the others elbowed him quiet. Rain slid down the diner windows while thunder rolled softly across the water outside. The waitress filled my cup without saying much, but before she walked away she leaned closer and whispered, Patricia's been calling emergency board meetings every night. That told me everything. Fear had entered the HOA leadership. Not anger. Fear. Around noon, I received a voicemail from Daniel Mercer asking if I would attend a special association session that evening. His voice sounded exhausted. Gone was the polished authority from the first meeting. Bellmere's leadership was starting to fracture internally, exactly the way institutions do once insurance exposure enters the conversation. By sunset, the clubhouse parking lot was overflowing again. Pickup trucks lined both sides of the gravel road while fog pressed low against the marina lights, and cold wind carried the smell of wet cedar through the crowd gathering outside. But this time something was different. Residents were not clustering around Patricia anymore. They were clustering away from her. I walked inside and immediately felt the tension shift. Patricia stood near the board table holding documents against her chest, but nobody approached her directly now. Several residents avoided eye contact with her completely. One older woman who had defended her publicly earlier that week walked right past without speaking. That seemed to affect Patricia more than she expected. Social authority was her oxygen. Without it, the confidence started slipping visibly. Daniel opened the meeting with shaking hands and announced the association had retained outside legal review regarding boundary clarification concerns. The room exploded into whispers immediately. Patricia tried regaining control fast. "There is no verified dispute," she said sharply. "Certain individuals are exaggerating incomplete records. Certain individuals. Interesting how my name disappeared now that legal counsel was involved." A resident near the Marina Committee stood up suddenly. "Did the association build on land it does not own?" Silence crashed through the room after that question. Patricia smiled tightly. "That interpretation would be irresponsible." Another voice from the back answered. "So is threatening homeowners before checking." More whispers. More shifting in chairs. Patricia looked toward Daniel for support, but he would not meet her eyes anymore. That was the moment her isolation became visible publicly. You could actually watch people emotionally pulling away from her in real time. Then Daniel cleared his throat carefully and said the sentence that changed the room forever. "Our insurance carrier has requested all historical permit records related to the entrance structure and marina roadway." Complete silence. Nobody even moved. Because everybody in Bellmere understood what that meant. Insurance companies do not ask questions unless somebody believes money is at risk. Patricia tried speaking again, but her voice came out tighter now. "This community has trusted leadership for decades." A man near the back answered quietly. "Maybe that is the problem." Patricia turned toward him slowly, stunned more by the betrayal than the accusation itself. And standing there beneath the fluorescent clubhouse lights while rain hammered the roof overhead, I realized Patricia Holloway was experiencing something completely unfamiliar for the first time in years. Public doubt. The collapse happened 3 mornings later under a gray sky, so heavy it looked like the whole lake had been pressed beneath concrete. Bellmere Cove woke up to county vehicles parked beside the entrance sign before most residents even finished breakfast. White utility trucks lined the marina road while yellow rain jackets moved through fog near the stone wall Patricia had defended for years like it was sacred ground. By 8 o'clock, the entire neighborhood was watching from porches, golf carts, and pickup trucks along Cedar Point Road. Nobody even pretended not to stare anymore. Institutional authority changes people fast, especially when it arrives carrying clipboards instead of opinions. I stood near my mailbox holding a coffee thermos while cold wind rolled off the lake and rainwater ran down the gravel shoulder beside the road. Deputy Cole pulled up first, but this time he was not responding to Patricia's complaint. He stepped out beside a county investigator I had not seen before, a woman in a dark waterproof coat carrying survey tubes beneath one arm. Patricia came storming out from the clubhouse entrance minutes later, moving fast enough through the rain that her heels kept slipping against wet pavement. "This is completely unnecessary," she snapped before anyone even spoke to her. The investigator ignored the tone entirely. "Patricia Holloway, Vice President of Bellmere Cove." Noted. That single word drained half the authority out of Patricia instantly. No smile. No politeness. No deference. Just documentation. Residents gathered closer beneath umbrellas while fog drifted across the marina shoreline behind them. You could feel the entire social hierarchy of Bellmere rearranging itself in real time. Patricia kept trying to regain control anyway. "This community has operated legally for over 20 years," she said sharply. Then records should support that, the investigator answered calmly. Silence spread through the crowd after that. Patricia turned toward me then, and for the first time since I arrived in Bellmere Cove, she looked genuinely unsettled instead of irritated. You escalated this far over a misunderstanding? She asked. Her voice had changed too, less polished, more personal. I answered quietly. I asked for proof before any of this started. A few residents exchanged looks immediately. Somebody near the marina whispered. He did. That whisper hit Patricia harder than the county investigators standing 10 feet away. Public support was slipping openly now. Daniel Mercer arrived moments later looking pale and exhausted, rain soaking through the shoulders of his jacket. He pulled Patricia aside near the entrance wall, but their voices still carried through the cold air. Insurance counsel says we may need immediate suspension of enforcement actions, he muttered. Patricia stared at him in disbelief. Suspend the board? During this? Patricia, Daniel said quietly. They think the entrance structure might not legally belong to us. She actually froze for a second after hearing that, completely still while rain hammered against the stone sign behind her. The sign she had used as a symbol of power for years now looked different somehow. Smaller. Fragile. Then the county investigator called everyone's attention back toward the shoreline access road where survey crews had uncovered an old buried marker near the marina ditch. Original boundary pin confirmed, she announced. Current entrance wall extends beyond recorded association parcel. The crowd erupted instantly. Not shouting. Worse. Whispering. Confused whispering. Angry whispering. Homeowners started pulling out phones. Residents who once followed Patricia everywhere were now stepping away from her physically like distance itself might protect them from liability. Patricia looked around the crowd desperately searching for support, but nobody moved toward her anymore. And standing there beside the wet cedar fence line, while thunder rolled over the lake behind us, she finally understood what real power loss feels like when an entire community stops believing you before you stop talking. The settlement closed 14 days later inside a conference room overlooking the county marina while rain drifted across the windows in long gray streaks, and tugboats moved slowly through fog beyond the shoreline. By then, Bellmere Cove looked nothing like the neighborhood Patricia Holloway had controlled a month earlier. The board suspended all enforcement actions pending legal restructuring. The association insurer opened a full liability review into unauthorized land use connected to the entrance wall and marina access road. Residents who once defended Patricia online were now posting questions about missing oversight records and unexplained legal fees. Nobody wanted to admit how quickly fear had shaped the community until the fear changed direction. Patricia resigned 3 days before the final agreement was signed. No farewell statement. No dramatic speech. Just a quiet notice emailed to residents at 6 in the morning while most of Bellmere was still asleep. I heard later she stopped going to the diner near the marina entirely because people would go silent when she walked in. Not hostile silence either. Worse, disappointed silence. The kind that leaves nowhere to hide. My attorney negotiated permanent recognition of the original parcel boundaries along with protected access rights to the shoreline road and dock approach my uncle had maintained for decades. The association also agreed to remove all enforcement notices tied to my property and reimburse legal costs connected to the dispute. But the part that mattered most to me was smaller than all of that. One line buried halfway through the agreement officially acknowledged that Warren Walker had never transferred ownership rights tied to the Western Shoreline Tract. My uncle had protected that land quietly for years, probably knowing exactly what Bellmere's leadership hoped people would never question. The morning after the agreement finalized, county crews arrived to reposition the Bellmere Cove entrance markers back within the corrected property boundary. Residents gathered along the roadside under jackets and umbrellas while survey crews worked through cold lake wind and muddy gravel shoulders. Nobody treated me like an outsider anymore. A few even nodded respectfully when I walked past. Daniel Mercer approached me near the marina gate carrying a folder under one arm, looking 10 years older than when I first met him. You were right to push back, he admitted quietly. We should have listened before this turned into a disaster. I looked toward the shoreline where fog rolled low across the water and answered honestly. I never wanted the community hurt. Patricia thought control was the same thing as stability, he said. That line stayed with me long after he walked away. Around sunset, I finally returned to the cabin dock alone for the first peaceful evening since arriving in Bellmere Cove. The storm front had finally broken apart, leaving only cold mist drifting above the lake while the sound of distant boat chains echoed softly against the marina posts. I reopened my uncle's old workshop beside the shoreline and spent an hour cleaning rust from his fishing tools while rainwater dripped steadily from the cedar roof outside. For the first time, the property actually felt like mine instead of contested territory. No deputies, no whispers, no cameras pointed from across the road. Just quiet water, cold air, and the low hum of lake wind moving through the trees the same way it probably had when Warren first bought the place decades ago. But Bellmere Cove still felt uneasy underneath the silence. Because once residents discover the people controlling their neighborhood were never fully honest about the land beneath them, they start questioning everything else too.